Good evening. We are pleased that you could join us tonight. On behalf of the J. Lewis Crozer Library, Executive Director Dr. Mark Winston, and Assistant Director Joanne Simone, I'm Dr. Susan Waller, Head of Programming. We welcome you and look forward to an inspiring program. We ask that you would keep your microphones muted during this evening. Our 2021 program on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day featured Patrick Parr, author of The Seminarian, Martin Luther King Jr. Comes of Age. It was obvious that evening that the connections among Chester, Pennsylvania, Crozer Theological Seminary, and Dr. King were rich and deserved further exploration. We are honored this evening that the Reverend Keith D. Dickens has agreed to moderate this program and help us continue to unpack this rich history. He also compiled the beautiful photo mosaic honoring Dr. King that we just watched. Currently serving as the senior pastor of Parkside United Methodist Church in Camden, New Jersey, Reverend Dickens is a graduate of Palmer Theological Seminary, where he was selected to complete his theological field education at the historic Calvary Baptist Church in Chester. Now, I'll turn the virtual floor over to Reverend Dickens, who will complete the introductions and lead tonight's discussion.
Welcome. I'm Reverend Keith D. Dickens, Senior Pastor of the Parkside United Methodist Church in the great city of Camden, New Jersey. I formerly served, as Susan said, as Associate Minister at Calvary Baptist Church in Chester, Pennsylvania. We want to thank you all for registering and joining us this evening via Zoom. I'm honored to serve as the moderator for our discussion on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his influence on education and ministry. I want to especially thank Dr. Susan Waller, Head of Programming, and Mrs. Catherine Moore, Lead Librarian for the J. Lewis Crozer Library in Chester, for organizing this event and for inviting me to participate in last year's program with author Patrick Parr of the Seminarian. And I thank you for inviting me back again this year, Susan, for tonight's very special program. We are extremely honored to have with us three distinguished Morehouse men. My grandfather would say, my grandfather was from Georgia, and he would say, son, you're walking in high cotton tonight. First, let me introduce Reverend Dr. Amos C. Brown, who is the senior pastor of the Third Baptist Church of San Francisco, California, known among world leaders, presidents, celebrities, and academic scholars alike for his trademark activism, intellectual discipline, and masterful oratory. Dr. Brown has been the pastor at Third Baptist Church of San Francisco, California since 1976. Dr. Brown is a local pastor with a global reach. In 2001, he served as a delegate for the United Nations Conference on Race and Intolerance in Durban, South Africa. He has also served on the national board of the NAACP and worked with Reverend Jesse Jackson and President Nelson Mandela in South Africa around issues of African development and US foreign policy. Like Dr. King, after graduating from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Brown continued his theological education at Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania. Dr. Brown of Jackson, Mississippi, shares his ministry and commitment to service and racial uplift with his wife, Mrs. Jane Smith Brown of Richmond, Virginia, and two sons, Amos C. Brown Jr., David Josephus Brown, and daughter Kizzy Marie Brown. Dr. Brown is also a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. He has many accomplishments and his resume is much larger than what I presented. And welcome, Dr. Brown. Next, let me introduce Reverend Dr. J. Wendell Mapson Jr. He is the senior pastor of the Monumental Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Born in West Palm Beach, Florida, and raised in Newark, New Jersey, Dr. Mapson is the son of a Baptist preacher, where he was baptized, licensed, and ordained at Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, where his father pastored for over 50 years. Dr. Mapson received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, a Master's of Divinity degree from Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, now Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School, and a Doctor of Ministry degree from Palmer Theological Seminary. Dr. Mapson is highly respected in the church and the academy as a preacher and scholar. Dr. Mapson is the author of several books, The Ministry of Music in the Black Church and Strange Fire, a study of worship and liturgy in the African American church. Dr. Mapson, also a noted lecturer and educator. His lecture entitled An Uncertain Sound was selected as one of the best presentations delivered at the prestigious Hampton Ministers Conference. His most recent text is entitled God of My Father, Sermons of a Father and Son, Reverend J. Wendell Mapson Sr. and Reverend J. Wendell Mapson Jr. Dr. Mapson has preached and lectured at many schools of higher learning and has received many honors. Dr. Mapson, prior to being called to serve as pastor of Monumental Baptist Church in Philadelphia, PA in 1987, he served as pastor of Union Baptist Church in Elizabeth, New Jersey from 1969 to 1987. Dr. Mapson has also served as vice chairman of the executive committee of the Foreign Mission Board of the National Baptist Conventions USA, Inc. In 1994, Dr. Mapson was inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers at Morehouse College. Admired by many, I received just a few days ago, I received a text by someone who could not join us this evening, but wanted me to share this. So please be patient with me as I read this to you. The text reads as such. Reverend Mapson was my father's ministerial assistant during his time at Morehouse in the 1960s. He knew Uncle Martin personally, and also because Reverend Mapson's father was friends with my father and Uncle Martin, my father wanted Reverend Mapson as his successor shortly before he died. If only Reverend Mapson had taken over the pastorate of my father's West Hunter Street Baptist Church. On September 12th, 2019, when my mother passed, Reverend Mapson, whom my family loves and adores, preached our mother's eulogy. I've known him since I was a little girl, so we call him Jesse. Congratulations on your presentation. Love always, Donzale Abernathy. Dr. Mapson is married to Mrs. Shirley D. Jones Mapson, and they are the proud parents of 3 sons, Keith, Brian, and Jesse III, the grandparents of 11, and the great-grandparents of 4 children. And lastly, let me introduce Reverend Dr. Tokunbo Adelekan, Senior Pastor of Tabernacle Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio, and Associate Professor of Theology and Ethics at Palmer Theological Seminary in St. David's, Pennsylvania. Born to an African Yoruba father and an African-American mother, Dr. Adelekan's life has been a pilgrimage of mind and spirit, a theologian, church growth practitioner, cultural critic, folklorist, and community leader who works out the prophetic wing of the Afro-Baptist faith. Dr. Adelekan is considered one of the leading American scholar preachers of his generation. In 2001, Ebony Magazine listed him as one of the 30 leaders of the future. He is the author of The Leaven in the Loaf, comparative analysis of the social reconstructionist projects of John Locke and Martin Luther King Jr. He's also the author of African Wisdom 101, Proverbs from the Motherland, A Charge to Keep, Remissioning the Urban Church for the 21st Century. Dr. Adelekan is a graduate of Morehouse College, Andover Newton Theological School, Harvard University, Princeton University, where he received his PhD in 2002. Dr. Adelekan shares his ministry with his wife, Dr. Tahira Adelekan, MD, and they are the proud parents of 3 children. Welcome all. Welcome, Dr. Adelekan. All right, let's get started. As you all know, Dr. King, and we were talking about this not too long ago, Dr. King was not born in a vacuum. He was the product of the South, and it was by no accident that he became a change agent and freedom fighter for the world. And I think it's important for us to start off tonight that before we do anything, that we put Dr. King in context, that he was a product of the South, and he long before he became a global leader or a global icon. So I want to talk about his influence on education and ministry and who were his influences. So I want to start with you, Dr. Brown. Can you share with us Dr. King's influences, particularly the Black church? I want to talk about that.
Thank you, Dr. Dickens. Let me first express my profound gratitude for all who work together to connect us in order the world might hear what young theologues were privy to in their theological training in a predominantly white environment at Crozer Seminary. We went to Crozer prepared to be world citizens. For at Morehouse, the mold that made us will not permit us, if I may use a Mississippi term, to be teeny and small. Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays exposed us to some of the iconic minds, theologians, scholars, and activists of the world. In fact, it was in chapel that I first heard Robert Frost, Madam Pandit of India, and the good brother who wrote Cry of the Beloved Country, Alan Payton. Don't forget Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, Howard Washington Thurman, and others. We were blessed with that kind of an influence.
Right, yeah.
And Dr. King, during his day, early on, was impacted by what I call the Trinitarian base of the church house, the schoolhouse, he inherited the influence of these institutions because his grandfather, A.D. Williams,
Right.
was at heart not just a preacher, but he was a hell-raising agitator. He was president of the Atlanta branch of the ACP. And of course, his father continued in that tradition when he married Dr. King's mother. I'm citing all of this of a biological connection, social influence, to say we were not hatched. There was a mold, there were molds that made us. That's why any Morehouse brother who really didn't just go to Morehouse, but permitted Morehouse to go through him, it's always been balanced. And to use the words of Dr. Robert Franklin, who made a compendium statement of what made a Morehouse man. First thing he said, the 5 wells of a Morehouse man was to be well-read. Well-read. Jesus, even when he preached his first sermon, the scripture says in Luke 4, he stood up to read. And we were admonished to be careful to use our heads for more than a hat rack. You had to be an independent thinker. And I can hear the haunting words of Dr. Mays now. If you can't think for yourself, someone else will do your thinking for you.
Right.
And whoever does your thinking for you will be your master and you their slave.
Mm.
And he said, men in Morehouse always be a responsible, critical thinker. So we will always to be well-read and know how to critically look at facts, history, and information, to use it all for the good of others. Secondly, we were to be well-spoken, well-spoken, to be masters of the language of the King's English, yes, but we knew the language of our ancestors. We knew about the great orators, such as Dr. Malachi Wyatt Johnson. We knew about John W. Davis, Howard Washington Thurman. And we knew that we were to really speak, articulate our way through life and not use brawn
Right.
to be brutal. We were to be also well traveled. Well traveled. That's why Dr. King went to India. That's why Dr. Mays even went to India. Howard Washington Thurman, when not many Black scholars or theologians had that opportunity. And we were to be well balanced, never extremists in our thinking, always looking at 2 sides to an issue, then coming to common ground to make sure that whatever positions we took would be for the summum bonum, for the common good, and not just for ourselves. And finally, Morehouse man had must be always well dressed. I'm looking at Dr. Mapson there right now. Now, the reason why I'm dressed as I am is because I recovered from COVID the other day, thanks be to God. But I do have on my dashiki from Mother Africa.
Well, you are dressed.
You are dressed. Younger brother,
sir.
Reminded of the fact that we both are descendants of the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria. I could say more, but what I've shared with you is that Dr. King went through the same disciplined experience, and this mold of the Morehouse man made us.
Yes, sir.
Made us.
Well,
Right.
I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Brown,
Right.
because I want you to share with us about Josephus, Reverend Dr. Josephus Pius Barbour. But I'm going to let you talk about Dr. Barbour a little bit later. But now I want to go to Dr. Mapson. I want Dr. Mapson to share with us, this theme that we have this year. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. his influence on education and ministry. And Dr. Mapson, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when we look at the history of our people, we came up in families that believed in education. And so I came up in a home. My father was a pastor, where it was a given that you were going to college. And so I grew up knowing about Morehouse College because my father being a pastor and being from Alabama, Morehouse was the place to go. He could not go, he said, because he couldn't afford to go. But there was never any doubt in my home that we were going to college. And when I started thinking about where I wanted to go, he talked to me about Morehouse College because it stood as in their minds the greatest college, not just HBCU, but the best of the best. And so when I decided to go there, also because of the influence of Dr. King, because I think again that if we look at the history, there's a strong, the reason why Morehouse College was founded was to train ex-slaves for ministry, and Spelman was founded to train missionaries for ministry. And so that strong educational influence among Southern Blacks was a part of my heritage, because my parents were from the South. And I always like to say that I was raised in the North in a Southern home. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to Morehouse, first thing my daddy said was, and back then you did what your daddy said. So he said, first thing you need to do is you need to find a church. Right. And of course, in my mind, I was saying, once I got away from home, I would never go to church again. But what was one of the first things I did when I went to Morehouse? I found the church, and I found Dr. Abernathy's church because I asked my dad, what church should I visit? And he said, well, West Hunter is right near the campus. You need to go there. And Reverend Abernathy's an Alabamian. My dad's an Alabamian. There's this Selma University connection. And I went to West Hunter, and I joined under watch care. And that kind of put me on a road to even being greater influenced by the Kings and the Abernathys. But it was never a question. I think that I think education is still the key, and I understand that there are some who may not be made for college education, but I think that should not minimize the need that we have as a people. Education can unlock doors. And so when I grew up in that, and Dr. King's influence, and it's part of my own ministry of trying to encourage our young people, do something with your life. If you can't go to college, find something that you can do well. Dr. Brown talked about how we were taught at Morehouse, do it well, that all work is honorable, but that the mission of the Black College in Morehouse was not just to graduate and make money. Mm-hmm. It was to graduate and be a credit to your race. It was to help uplift people. And from Dr. Mays, and even before him, John Hope, Mays, Howard Thurman, Dr. Brown went through the list. These were persons that we looked up to, and they inspired us to be what we are today.
Awesome. I'm thinking about, Dr. King, he enters Morehouse at age 15. He graduates comes at 18, he comes to Chester, Pennsylvania, to Crozer. And some people might be surprised that leaving Morehouse, he was not a straight A student when he left Morehouse. Right. And he came to Chester and Crozer. But he had the foundation before he even got to Morehouse was in his home with his parents and his grandparent and his grandmother and his grandparents. And then he comes to Chester and he develops there, starts to develop there. I think Patrick Parr talked about it in his book, The Seminarian, Martin Luther King Jr. coming of age and the time that he spent in Chester. But we're gonna get to that. I want to come back to that. But right now I want to jump over to Dr. Tokunbo Adelekan, who I first met as a student at Palmer Theological Seminary. And I took a course out of sequence. I saw in the syllabus, I saw in the registration that there was a course entitled The Theology and Ethics of Martin Luther King Jr. Right. And I had to take that course. And I went to my advisor, Dr. Picos Lee, and I said, Dr. Picos Lee, I want to take this particular course. She said, well, it's out of sequence, you can't take. I said, I need to take it now. So I bugged her long enough and she said, okay, Keith, go ahead and take the course. And that's how I was introduced to Dr. Tokunbo Adelekan, who taught the course. So Dr. Adelekan, I want to open the floor up to you right now and give your thoughts on Dr. King as a global thinker, global leader, and you can go from there.
Sure, no problem. Good evening, everyone. Glad to be part of the conversation. I didn't know if Dr. Brown wanted to accent something, so I wanted to give the floor, the mic to Dr. Brown. If you want, Doc, if you want to come in, we'll.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to him. I want you to
go. Before we get to Crozer, let me say this real quick. Dr. King entered Morehouse at the age of 15.
Yes, sir.
How did he get there so early? During World War II, Morehouse almost closed its doors.
Right, that's right.
And the Board of Trustees had suggested to Dr. Mays that the school would close during the war and reopen after the war was over. But Dr. Mays said, we must not close the school. If you close it, you never get it back open.
Right.
He said, let us be creative.
Preach, Doc.
Why not consider maintaining our enrollment through a plan of action throughout the South of going to high schools where there are bright young men in the 10th, 11th grades.
Right.
And admit them to Morehouse as early admission students. And Dr. King was in that first class of early admission students in 1944. That's how he got there so early.
So early, yes.
It was out of the necessity of keeping the school open.
My.
That's right.
I wanted to give that little caveat.
Thank you, sir.
And also, at first he didn't want to be a preacher because why? He didn't see many models of ministers who use their minds. He wanted to be a lawyer.
Yes.
But when he met Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays,
right,
Ethworth, South Carolina, and saw this erect, tall, handsome, dark man who was a scholar.
That's right.
He then concluded it wasn't an either or matter. You can be sharp with spirituality and your intellect.
Exactly. Awesome. Dr. Adelekan, you want to pick up?
Yeah, so
Dr. Brown left off.
I'm not sure if I can pick up because I've been reading Matthew recently and I feel like Peter, Mount of Transfiguration.
Right.
Brother Keith, I've met Dr. Brown and Dr. Mapson. I just want to build tabernacles and just stay for a minute just to be under their tutelage. But I say that not just anecdotally, I say that in terms of anointing, because, beloved, good evening, everyone. Again, Dr. Brown has personally mentored me in the sense that when I was an 18-year-old in Morehouse College, he met me on campus. He didn't know me from Adam, and he on the spot saw that I was struggling with my vocational identity and began to pour in. He had just flown in from San Francisco. It was in the day that we would rush to the airport to pick up the preachers just so that we could eat from their hands. And so Dr. Brown means something to me personally. I have my wife and my Tahira's on the line, and I have my youngest. And when we got to Philadelphia, Dr. Mapson was our pastor. Amen. He still mentors me and brought us under, as Shirley Mapson, who's on the line. And so what these men embody for me, the richest parts of the Black family, Black decency, amen, Black church and Black preaching. So I'm just honored to be here. And then finally to Pastor Dickens, who used to be a student and is now my professor. Look at what the Lord has done with his life. If I may very quickly say a couple of things about his impact. First, I think it's important that we situate King within history, not just 20th century history, but modern history. King was born in 29, year of the Depression. He was born between two great wars in which, if you will, people of European descent were trying to fight each other, and they called it World War. So I think it's ironic that he was born, if you will, in the middle of the cross of history. And so his life becomes, if you will, a symbol of resurrection. If you will, there are three particular ways I think King influenced education and ministry. One, has already been accented tonight, he pushed upon the American psyche the integrated personality in an era in which radical hedonism and consumerism was taken over. That kind of tripartite soul of one ought to look up to God, one ought to look inside themselves, self-examination, and then one would serve humanity, sort of a tripolar identity, balance that Dr. Brown talked about. Oh. I think it begins there. But I think secondly, in terms of his impact, is that, again, you have to see King not just as a Black preacher, not just as an American scholar. You have to situate King within that tradition of modern global thinkers. Latin America, Gutierrez, Europe, folk like Shakespeare and Locke, Africa, Mandela, Nnamdi Azikiwe. You have to put him along the Lincolns and the Jeffersons of the world, the Toni Morrisons, the Wole Soyinkas. Why? Because when you read King, you're not reading an individual, beloved. You're reading an institution. You're reading, if you will, a melting pot, or if you will, let's use the word gumbo pot, of someone who drew obviously from the Black church.
Right.
Obviously from the Black intellectual tradition, NAACP Du Bois, from American civil religion, from political liberalism. And the test of that is this, that if you're going to study King, you can't just study King as a theologian. You look at the average American university curriculum. You can study King in terms of history, political science, theological ethics, social ethics, political philosophy, American civilization, African-American studies, critical race theory, and of course, Black religion and the Black church. That's how integrative the brother was. I think finally, on the international scale, and Dr. Brown, I thank you for what you represent, Dr. Mapson, and they're going to be modest about this, but these men are not just Black preachers, they are Pan-African scholars. And the real impact of King was the number of movements that his life, 38 years on terra firma, 38 years. Look at the kind of movements that he inspired in North America, around the world. The Black conscious movement is connected to King. The Black power movement is connected to King. The feminist movement is connected to King. The anti-war movement is connected to King. The Latin American liberation struggles, the Pan-African struggles, the anti-colonial struggles are connected to King. That's why he studied at the School of Oriental African Studies in London. That's why he studied University of Nigeria. And then look at his impact upon the organization of African unity, where folk like Tutu and Mandela began to pick up from him. So when you talk about King's impact, You really have to see him as a prismatic figure, that when you read King, you're looking at cultures and subcultures and the ways in which they decided to throw up the shackles, if you will, of colonialism and subalternism en route to freedom around the world. This is the kind of person that you're studying. He was, in the real sense, a Christocentric humanist. He's a global figure, and I'll just submit it that way.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
And
It's let the church say amen. But I want to, Dr. Mapson, you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, because I think that you didn't have to even know Dr. King to be mentored by him. And I think what Dr. Adelekan is saying and what Dr. Brown has already said is if you were connected to Morehouse, for instance, that, I mean, any of these brothers, if you hear you went to Morehouse, your heart is automatically open to that brother, because the mentoring, the Amos Brown mentoring me and mentoring Dr. Adelekan, it has just been. Now, Dr. Brown is very modest, but there's some history that may be lost. When I went to Morehouse, Dr. Brown was, I think, about 2 years ahead of me. What you see now is what you would have seen then. He has always been on the firing line. And what he will not tell you is that he was a driver for Dr. Mays. He lived in Dr. Mays' home. He went to the airport picking up these great men who we heard in chapel that we didn't want to hear at the time because we didn't want to go to chapel. But chapel was required. But had it not been required, I never would have heard Howard Thurman.
Wow.
Never would have heard Mordecai Johnson. Never would have heard of Martin Luther King Jr. because it was nothing for Dr. Mays and Dr. King. You just stroll around the campus. You just walk by them, and they didn't have Dr. Brown. They didn't have bodyguards. They didn't. What do you call them now in the church, Adelekan?
Armor bearers.
Yeah, right. They didn't have armor bearers, and Dr. King, you could just see him walking around with nobody around him. You wouldn't even know it was Dr. King.
That's right.
He was.
I want to bring something out, and I want to go right to Dr. Brown on this. One day I was on the campus and I get a phone call, and it's from Dr. Brown, and it says, "Doc, hey, Dr. Brown, how you doing? Doc, you been to your mailbox lately? Have you been to your mailbox today?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, when you get to your mailbox, there's something in there for you." I go home and I pull out this envelope. It's dated February 20th, 2008 to Reverend Amos C. Brown from the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute, Stanford University. It says, "Dear Reverend Brown, I'm sending you Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s notes from his 1961-62 social philosophy class at Morehouse College. The originals are at Boston University's Howard Gottlieb Archival Research Center in its King Papers collection. And the center must be contacted if you wish to make public use of these materials. These materials offer a look into the approach Dr. King took in teaching what would be the only class he led after his graduation from seminary and graduate studies.
Right.
If we can be of any further assistance to you, please let us know. Sincerely, Susan Englander, Associate Director." It's notes, his old Montauk blue class notebook that Dr. King wrote in his own handwriting. I'll just lift it up here a little bit so you can see this is Dr. King's personal handwriting of that class. Now, Dr. Brown told me, he says, "Well, Dickens, there are a lot of folk that say they are students of Dr. King, and that's true. But he only taught one class, and that was in 1961-62, and I was a member of that class." And so the class roster is here as well.
I missed 2 years.
There were 8 students in the class. One of the students was Horace J. Bond, better known as Julian Bond.
Right.
And Amos C. Brown. But a number of students were in that class, some Spelman students as well. So I want to pass it off to Dr. Brown and let Dr. Brown talk a little bit about Dr. King and his teachings.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dickens. Friends, Dr. King moved from Montgomery to Atlanta in 1960 to join his father as co-pastor of Ebenezer. And at that time also, Dr. Mays advised Dr. King that before he went to the next level in the civil rights movement, that he would come aside and do some reflecting and teaching. It goes back to that one point about being well read, even though you may have a PhD degree, you still need to keep on reading and be engaged with students. And there were several of us who had achieved the level of being seasoned civil rights activists. When I went to Morehouse, as Brother Mapson, Dr. Mapson referenced, I had been already baptized in civil rights activism. At the age of 14, when Emmett Till was lynched by those 2 evil white men, I had the task of selling Jet magazines. And when I got my shipment and looked at that cover, that mutilated head, I ran to Medgar Evers, who was the newly appointed field director in the state of Mississippi. Told him how upset I was. His office was about 3 blocks from my home, there in the old historic Farish Street district in Jackson. And he looked at me and said, Amos, I know you're very upset, but don't just be upset and angry. Let's be smart and strategic. Why not organize a youth council of NACP so that you and your young friends will learn how to fight this evil of racism in a strategic, smart way. And I organized the first youth council in the state of Mississippi in 1955. Fast forward, that spring of 1956, Mr. Evers asked my mother if I could ride with him to San Francisco to attend the 47th annual meeting of the NACP. And we left Jackson that summer, month of June, June the 24th. To Vicksburg, Dallas, Amarillo, down to Santa Fe, Flagstaff, over to Needles, California, then up through the valley, then to the Bay. And that was the first time I had seen that much water, because Jackson was inland city, you know, central portion of the state. And I came to that great convention. And also, Dr. Dickens, I have a copy of his speech. Among other things he said in that speech that night that got the house. He said, I have the dream that the day will come when all of God's children, from base black to treble white, will be significant on the Constitution's keyboard. And he spoke for Youth Night. He was booked as the speaker for the Youth Night. He was only 26 years old. Let me say this also, Dr. King was not a man of height He was only 5'7", but he had a great stature, intellect, and presence and commitment. So it was at that meeting, I repeat, I met him and Miss Rosa Parks, Bishop Stephen Gills Spotswood, who's chairman of the board of NACP, Philip Randolph, great labor man,
Right.
and of course Thurgood Marshall.
Yes.
Had him there too. So when I got to Morehouse, I had already been involved in student activism through our youth council. Let me say parenthetically here, the first sit-down movement, as they called it then, was not in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960, February the 1st. It was at this meeting in San Francisco in 56 that the groundwork was laid for the student demonstrations. And the first ones were pulled off in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, led by Barbara Posner and as president and Clara Luper, the advisor. And then there was the youth council in Wichita, Kansas, and Louisville, Kentucky. However, at the 1959 meeting in New York, the 50th anniversary meeting of the NACP, there was a young man from Greensboro, North Carolina, named Ezella Blair, who was an alternate youth delegate. And I have a copy of the Credentials Committee's report where Ezella Blair is listed as an alternate youth delegate. Posey, Clara Luper, who came with a busload of kids to that convention. And they made their glowing report on what they had done in 1958 and broke down segregation at lunch counters in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So Ezella Blair left that meeting all fired up, went back to Greensboro to enter A&T College as a freshman. He tried to get the students that fall to replicate what had happened in Oklahoma City. But they were scared because they didn't move. However, it was on February the 1st, 1960, that they got fired up and ready to go. Now that's the accurate history of that movement. And around that time, later, I go back to when Dr. King came to be with his father to co-pastor. Dr. Mays convinced him to teach this seminar in social philosophy. And as been stated, I have those notes and that class roster. And it was a rich experience. But one thing real quick that I want to say, among other things that we learned sitting at his feet, was he passed on
I think your screen froze, Dr. Brown. I think we may have lost him. We will try to get Dr. Brown back because I wanted to go to him again. I want to talk to him about Dr. Barbour. Susan, can you see if you can try to bring Dr. Brown back in, back on?
Yeah, I'm back now.
Okay, great.
My apologies. I'm back.
Great.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Well, I want to pivot.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you, Dr. Brown. Can you hear us? Hello, Dr. Brown. Well, while we're waiting for Dr. Brown to come back on. Dr. Brown, are you there?
I'm
Unmute yourself.
Austria.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Now you put your video back on. Can you hear us? Okay, I'm gonna switch over to Dr. Mapson. Can you share with us a little bit about your thoughts about Dr. Barbour, Dr. J. Pius Barbour, who was the senior pastor at the Calvary Baptist Church in the great city of Chester, Pennsylvania. And when I came to Calvary as an intern from Palmer Theological Seminary, I knew about Dr. King being an intern there, but I did not know, I was ignorant about many things with the church, and I soon learned so much of the rich history of Calvary Baptist Church and its relationship with seminarians before way before Martin Luther King came. There was some names. One name I want to throw out is Samuel DeWitt Proctor, who was a student at Crozer before Dr. King, and he was mentored by Reverend Dr. J. Pius Barbour, who was again the senior pastor at the historic Calvary Baptist Church. And then after Dr. Proctor graduated from Crozer, he actually went on to do his graduate work at Boston University.
Yes,
So
I'm back.
So here you see King. We're talking about following in the footsteps, and here's King also following in the footsteps, it seems, of Samuel DeWitt Proctor in that vein. Can you talk a little bit about Dr. J. Pius Barbour?
Yes. Again, I think to begin, back then there was a Black church network of preachers and churches that were part of the National Baptist Convention USA Incorporated. And that's where Black preachers went every year to the annual sessions. And it wasn't just pastors, it was Black theologians. So if you were at the convention, then you would see a Mordecai Johnson, a Howard Thurman, a Benjamin Mays, and a Gardner C. Taylor,
Andy Ray.
A Sandy F. Ray. And because of that fellowship, preachers knew each other from all across the country. So when Dr. King leaves Atlanta, leaves the South now, had no real experience in the North, Dr. King's father says to Dr. Barbour, who he knew, because they all knew each other, take care of my son.
Another Morehouse man.
Absolutely. So when I first met Dr. Barbour, it was through my father. And my father said to Dr. Barbour, when my son gets to Crozer, look after my son. There was a network of preachers, and Dr. Barbour served as a mentor to those of us who came through, starting with Sam Proctor, on through Dr. King, William Augustus Jones, Harold Carter, and the list goes on. And I just happened to be at the end of that list because I was in the last Crozer class on the Chester campus. So I was the last of the Barbour boys, the very last.
The last of the Barbarites.
Yep. And he did not live many years after that.
He passed in 1974.
Yeah, his ministry was to us, not only to Calvary. And we learned more, Dr. Brown, in his living room and his kitchen, about ministry than we learned, and not to discredit the education we had at Crozer, but we got something with him that we could not get in a liberal white seminary. And so he became that father figure. And for those who didn't have a strong father figure, as I did, even more so, he became that person. And he too, remember, he was a model of educational excellence.
Yes.
Scholar, Crozer grad, the editor of the National Baptist Voice of the National Baptist Convention, which was read by thousands. Yes,
This is what it says. It says, meet Reverend J. Pius Barbour. He speaks to 10,000 ministers. Besides pastoring Calvary Baptist Church in Chester, Pennsylvania, he edits the National Baptist Voice. Mrs. Barbour runs Golden Age Club. This is an article, but it talks about, it is a picture of Dr. Barbour in this this article here.
right.
But go ahead. I'm sorry, Dr. Mapson, but then I want to get to Dr. Brown because
okay.
Go ahead. You're doing great. You're doing great.
But Amos note, I mean, I say Dr. Brown, but you know, I know. But we would sit in his living room,
Right.
and the way he taught us was he would ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's a Socratic method.
right? Socratic method. He would ask questions, and then we're fumbling around trying to answer the questions, and he'd talk about Heidegger and Schleiermacher and Immanuel Kant and a brilliant mind, but he gave America, to a lesser degree than King, but this model of a Black preacher who was erudite and scholarly, and that was the model that attracted so many of us, that you could be trained and still spiritual. There was kind of this idea among Black people, and I think among whites as well, that somehow school is going to take away your Jesus.
Preach, Doc. Preach. Yes, sir.
And don't go to the cemetery, right?
Right. And if school could take away your Jesus, you didn't have much Jesus.
Have mercy. Have mercy.
So we were able to sit in his living room. He made a salad, right? And we would eat this, I don't know what was in the salad, but we eat the salad in his kitchen. And that's where we were formed. And it is the same kitchen where Martin Luther King was formed.
Yes.
Dr. Mapson?
Yes.
Don't forget that rotating bookshelf that he had.
Yes, right in the living room.
And he would call it his parlor.
Yeah.
His parlor.
Now.
And it swiveled. It swiveled. He had books all in there.
Now, when I was at Calvary, I heard about all the legends, preachers, Samuel DeWitt Proctor, Harold Carter Sr., William Augustus Jones, Charles Booth, J. Wendell Mapson Jr., but no disrespect to any of them, and Mike King and Walter McCall and all of these names, these great big names. And
don't forget Dr. Prathia Hall-Wynn. Don't forget.
Yes. All of these names, these giants, legendary names. But I was told that out of all of the preachers that came through, there were, outside of King, there was no one closer to Dr. Barbour than Dr. Amos C. Brown.
Correct.
And so, Dr. Brown, I'm going to let you speak at this time about Dr. And I noticed one of your children is named, middle name, Josephus.
That's right, David, the youngest boy.
Right.
David Josephus. I named his middle name. His dog's name.
Can you talk? Because when I was with you in San Francisco some years back, you told me, so you said, the reason I'm here, all of my success that I've had in ministry, I owe to Reverend Dr. Josephus Pius Barbour. Can you share with us tonight about him?
Yes, sir. Doc was my father figure.
Mm-hmm.
My father passed in 1964, 1 month before I finished Morehouse. And I had the choice that summer of 64 of going to Mississippi to be involved in that summer, which Marion Wright Edelman, Julian Bond, and others, were working in the Mississippi Delta to get people registered to vote. And if I had gone to Mississippi, it could have been my lot of being murdered, as were Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. It sends chills up my spine every time. However, after I finished Morehouse, I was awarded a scholarship to go to Africa on the program called Operations Crossroads Africa, that was started by a great Black theologian, scholar, social activist, James H. Robinson. He went to Knoxville College and Lincoln University and Yale. He was a great man. Well, this program was developed by Dr. Robinson when he was a pastor of the Church of the Masters, Presbyterian Church in Harlem, New York. He came up with the idea of Black and white students going to Africa to work with their African counterparts, to do summer work in community building, traveling and studying. And that was a great experience for me. I was assigned to Liberia, Senegal, and Sierra Leone, there in West Africa. And after I came back from Operation Crossroads Africa, but let me say parenthetically here that was the pilot program for the Peace Corps. That's where John Kennedy got the idea from. His Black Presbyterian preacher. And Sergeant Shriver was put in charge of organizing this program. And Crossroads, I believe, is still going on now. Willis Logan, who also is from Jackson, Mississippi. But when I got to Crozer, my father had passed, and didn't have much money. Doc really became my father figure. And I spent many days, many nights in his home. And Miss Esther Talley, one of Doc's great members, always had a meal for us. And Mapson too sat at her table. We loved some Mama Talley. She was from North Carolina. Roxborough, North Carolina. She and her husband, John, they were very close to Dr. Barbour. What did our experience do for us at Old Calvary? We were able to stay connected with the seminary and Black urban religion. And if we did not have that connection, we would have gone to Crozer and would have come out wearing Black folks' colors, but not, so to speak, playing on our team for liberation. And it was Dr. Barbour who mentored Dr. King and enabled us to not train ourselves away from our heritage and history, but not also permit heritage and history to make us mediocre and pedestrian. That's what he did for us. And he was editor of that National Baptist Voice. He succeeded his brother, Russell, as editor. Russell was pastor of the First Baptist, Capitol Hill, Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. Barbour's from Galveston, Texas. His first pastor was at Hempstead, Texas. And he also was on the faculty at Tuskegee. He and Mrs. Barbour too. Yes. So we got a practicum every week. As Dr. Mapson said, I'm going over and sitting at the feet of Dr. Barbour. We talk about everything, you name it. Politics, sociology, philosophy, and history, you know, personal relationships, about our relationships with our girlfriends or wives to be. And Dr. Mapson was a pallbearer, Levi Baldwin, Charles Edward Booth. Who else Dr. Mapson at Doc's funeral? At Doc's funeral?
Earl Talbot. Earl Talbot.
Archie Lamont.
Here it is right here. I can tell you. Honorary pallbearers. Reverend Levi Baldwin, Reverend Charles E. Booth, Reverend Amos C. Brown, Reverend Jesse Wendell Mapson Jr., Reverend John Scott, Reverend Earl Talbot, Reverend Thomas Brown, Reverend Lloyd A. Burris, Reverend Roderick D. Clark, Reverend Archie Lamont, Reverend Randall McCaskill, Reverend Dennis Norris, and Reverend Milton Owens. This is from 1974. And only reason I have this is because of my late mentor, Deacon Matt Jenkins, who one day after church saw me bouncing around to the members, and he said, "I got something for you." He said, and I said, "Yeah, Deke, I'll be right with you." He waited patiently, and after I finished greeting the members and talking, I walked up to him. He smiled, pulled out of his suit pocket this program from Dr. Barbour's Homegoing, and doesn't look like all the fancy graphics that we have today with the pictures and all with the homegoing programs, but the names that are inside of here are just church history, Black church history.
Oh, yes.
The organist was Dr. Samuel Cosby. Worship leader was Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor. Prayer was done by Reverend Walter McCall. The sermon eulogy was done by Reverend William Augustus Jones, a solo by Reverend Harold Carter.
I've done my best.
It goes on and on.
Yep. I've sung my song.
Yeah. Boy, hey, I was so torn up, you know, Booth made fun of me.
Listen, I was talking to
I was next to you.
Yeah, someone said that all they can remember was hearing you wail. They said I could still hear Dr. Brown wailing when Dr. Barbour's Homegoing.
Weeping and wailing.
Yes, sir. We're weeping and wailing. It
was a great.
But one other piece we must get in is that
great loss. It was a great loss.
Great loss.
Whenever an illiterate student got Crozer, your orientation was go and meet Doc and to preach that Sunday following your coming.
Right.
That was a ritual. And so when I went up, when Archie Lamont and several others took me over to the house, and they told Doc that I was from Mississippi. And old Doc looked at me, he said, "Boy, can you hoop?" I said, "No, Doc, I'm no hooper." I said, "No." I said, "I hung around Samuel Williams and Benjamin Elijah Mays." No hooper. And so he said, "Well, I see what you can do. I'm going to put you up to preach Sunday morning. Get ready." And boy, I went that morning. I went to the toilet twice. Because Doc had this little notebook.
Yeah.
That he took notes on everybody.
That's right.
And he would sit there with his index finger, his right finger, and that book in his hand, and he would take down notes. And after he finished, he said, "All right, come on, let's go. We got to go have a critique."
That's right.
Come on to my office. And he sat us down and graded us.
Rated us.
Content, methodology, delivery,
Audience.
and audience response.
That's right.
And you know what he told me? He said, Negro, the response that you got this morning, I don't believe it's happened since Mike King came here.
Wow.
He said, I don't do that, that go through your head. And
I want to.
he
Can I
said,
just want to jump in real quick, Doc? I want you to, because you're right. I will come right back to you. I want to read this. This is from October of 1948. In October of 1948, after Martin Luther King Jr. entered Crozer Theological Seminary, he wrote to his mother in response to a letter that she had written to him. Their closeness is apparent in the subject he discusses with her. It says, "Dear mother, your letter was received this morning. I often tell the boys around the campus I have the best mother in the world. You will never know how I appreciate the many kind things you and Daddy are doing for me. So far, I've gotten the money, the dollars every week. As to my wanting some clippings from the newspapers, I must answer yes. I wonder why you hadn't sent many, especially the Atlanta World. You stated that my letters aren't newsy enough. Well, I don't have much news. I never go anywhere much but in these books. Sometimes the professors come in class and tell us to read out our assignments in Hebrew, and that is really hard. Do you know the girl I used to date at Spelman, Gloria Royster? She is in school at Temple, and I have been to see her twice. Also, I met a fine chick in Philadelphia who had gone wild over the old boy. Since Barbour told the members of his church that my family was rich, the girls are running me down. That of course, I don't ever think about them. I'm only busy studying. I eat dinner at Barbour's house quite often. He is full of fun, and he has one of the best minds of anybody I ever met. I haven't had time to contact any of your friends up this way. Maybe I will get to it pretty soon. I hope you will explain to the members why I haven't written any of them. I'm going to write a letter to the entire church next week. It should be there by the first Sunday. I hear from Christine every week. I try to answer her as regularly as possible. I hope she will somehow get adjusted to that accounting. Reverend Ray was here Friday at the state convention, Sandy Ray.
Wow.
He told me to come up anytime I get ready. He is looking for you and Daddy in November. Well, I guess I must go to study. Give everybody my regards. Your son, ML.
Wow.
And just
That's
so everybody can see,
Pastor
this
Dickens,
is a picture of Dr. King.
Oh, yes.
Members of the Calvary Baptist Church, leaders of the Calvary Baptist Church. Is kind of folded, I put there. And the First Lady, Ole Little John Barbour, also a Spelman alumna, was very influential in Dr. King's life as well while he was at Calvary and Crozer.
Pastor Dickens, I just wanted to put a little footnote there.
Mm-hmm.
There was a moment there, I think we acknowledged that King was convention royalty. He's third generation preacher.
Yes.
Came from a robust African-American family and church.
Mm-hmm.
I think one needs to anchor that with Dr. Brown, Dr. Mapson, they can speak about this, that at his death,
mm-hmm.
where was he? He was not in Oslo receiving the Nobel Prize. He was marching with garbage workers in Memphis, Tennessee, that had on placards, "I am a man."
Yes,
capturing 500 years of dehumanization.
Yes. Tell us.
Two nights before that,
Sir.
a garbage worker
Yes.
was plowed over and they just picked up his body. Talk about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
dumped it in a large trash can and left it there. And so they were looking for somebody to come and galvanize, and they brought in Dr. King. And Dr. King, being a roots man in the true sense of the word, yes, he was royalty, but one has to understand the magnanimity. This man, they didn't call him Black Jesus for nothing.
Yeah.
He died because he was in Memphis preaching in solidarity with the oppressed, embodying what Lyotard said when he said that truth is allowing suffering to speak.
Say it, Doc.
Oh.
And so these virtue instilling habits under Dr. Barbour, in which one has to talk about paideia, right? You're not just talking about the capacity to deliver a sermon.
Yeah.
Because what Dr. Mapson and Dr. Brown are saying, and you can't capture it with words, is there's a way in which you preach past the intellect. Why? Because your soul no longer belongs to you. It's like Jeremiah, caught up in my bones. It's fire. You're no longer in control of yourself. Why? Because there's a greater power in control of you that you cannot just learn in the classroom. And so the average Morehouse man, as has been said, the Morehouse man is not made in the classroom. The Morehouse man was made in the chapel. You got your footnotes in the classroom. You learn footsteps in the chapel. You got your certification in the classroom. You got your transformation in the chapel. See what I'm saying? And so it's almost like Paul Tillich asking the question, do you believe that they asked Paul Tillich, do you believe who he read? Do you believe that the Bible is the absolute irrepressible, inerrant word of God? He said yes and no. This is King. No, if you're in control of the word.
Yes.
Yes, if the word is in control of you.
Yeah.
If I perish, let me perish. You present your body as a living sacrifice. Remember, you're not just talking about somebody who had a profession. That's what I believe Dr. Brown is trying to get at. You're talking about somebody, because you get your professionalism from seminary, and you never want to discount that, because I'm a seminary professor. But what they're talking about is something greater than profession. They're talking about vocation.
Yes.
They're talking about, if I perish, let me perish. And remember, this is someone who J. Edgar Hoover threatened. They had tape on him.
That's right.
They're talking about social media now. They had information on him. They were about to send the information to Coretta, because he was not perfect now. We're not talking about a flawless brother.
Right.
I mean, you hear it in the letters. But you're talking about somebody who said, regardless of what they were going to do, he was going to give his life to the movement. And I'll just say this.
And he took the black church to the public square.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
And he is living out the gospel.
Right. And to the international public square, because remember, I have my aunt on the call here and I have my mom. These are African-American women, highly educated, that decided to go across the water and marry Yoruba and Igbo guys from Nigeria. So my mom and my aunt, they dream in English, hyphenated Americans. My dad and Uncle Bezel, they dreamed in Igbo and Yoruba and Igbo. So I'm confused. I got all kind of stuff coming through me. You understand? But the point I'm trying to make is that what they were trying to do is make up for 400 years of separation with their romantic lives. They're not going to talk about that, but I'm going to put that on there, put my mom on this. But you understand what's happening. But King in 61, right after Nnamdi Azikiwe got inaugurated as president of Nigeria, who is there? Dr. King, November 14th. And so they're bringing up history. Dr. King is traveling all over the world, but he's trying to be with the roots folk in places like Africa, trying to reunite people coming through colonization. So I just want to put that on.
We have all of this richness of King. And young people need to know he was only 39 years old.
Yes.
When he died. And so the life he had before December 1st, 1955, prepared him for what he was where God was about to take him. I remember talking to C.T. Vivian, and he said, Daddy King kind of molded his son and had made ways for his son. He had that kind of influence. And so when he left Boston University, Daddy King had set it up where he could go to Dexter and be the pastor there, and then eventually come back to Atlanta to pastor Ebenezer Baptist Church. But his heavenly father had another plan for him. And December 1st, 1955, first it was Emmett Till. Emmett Till happened, and then after Emmett Till, then December 1st, 1955 hit, and Dr. King's world was never the same. From December 1st, 1955 to April 4th, 1968.
But Doc, the way God works,
My God,
is that King wanted to go to Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
To pastor. They rejected him because of his age. Had they not rejected him and he'd gone to Chattanooga and not Montgomery, we wouldn't be talking.
We've been talking about Dr. King. Wow.
And also he was under consideration for a position at Riverside.
Riverside.
That's right.
Yes,
That's right.
yes, sir.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
and Dr. Amos and Dr. Mapson can talk about that. I think it's also the record is that when Dr. King died, because we live in an era of I need to be careful here, but there's a way in which people are rushing to the pulpit with interesting motives. Dr. King believed in using the mind to serve church and humanity. The record is he had less, beloved, than $400 in his account.
Yes.
When he was brutally assassinated.
Right.
So you're talking about somebody who he wasn't just preaching sacrifice. He actually did bear the cross.
Right.
And you know, the Nobel Peace Prize money,
He donated.
he gave it to the movement.
That's right.
Amen. That's right.
Gave it to the movement.
That's right.
And in addition to that, Dr. King was always concerned about the movement.
That's right.
Not himself, the man. And also we should keep in mind, there was nothing arrogant about him.
That's right.
You know, he was a great mind, iconic personality, but he was in that league of people like Dr. Mays, Gardner Taylor, Samuel D. Wood Proctor, who always had that human touch, and they didn't get big-headed at all. Dr. King was the leader of the pack in terms of that kind of humility. He was a connector. And you know, when he studied up at Boston University under Brightman, he ran into the concept of personalism. That's another thing that I learned in that seminar, that class that I was in at Morehouse. What did personalism say? Every human being is a person, excuse me.
Right.
And imbued with worth and dignity, regardless to how they may have superficial differences. And that's the reason why throughout my ministry, I have never been small in my outlook. I've related to all faith communities, and still I'm at home with being the son of a Baptist preacher and a grandfather who was a Baptist preacher, and several uncles were preachers in Mississippi.
Yes.
I never was against women preachers. Couldn't do it. When the issue came up about the gay lifestyle,
Yes.
though I'm heterosexual, you know, and I do see the worth of the family and all that, but I still saw even gay people as being persons.
Yes.
And I would not let the right wingers or any conservative pastors and any of my pastors engage in gay bashing Only thing I look for in the gay community, as I look for in the heterosexual community, is to be who you are, yes, respect others,
Mhm.
and make sure that we all understand that we got our civil rights under that 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. And gay people are human. They are members of the society. As long as they're not bothering anybody, leave them alone. That's what I've always stood my ground on that issue, because I believed in Dr. King's concept of personalism.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
we have women deacons at Third Baptist Church.
Mhm.
And the church didn't fold because I always heard Dr. King talking, whispering in my ears about respecting the worth and dignity of all people.
Right.
And all means all.
Doc, I want the language of King keeps jumping out at me, and I was writing my notes to some of the notes, and it ties right into what you're saying. King talked about all life is interrelated.
Yes.
We're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of this interrelated structure of reality. And so then he goes on to say, did you ever stop to think that you can't leave your job, you can't leave for your job in the morning without being dependent on most of the world? You get a cup, you get up in the morning and you go to the bathroom and reach over for a sponge, and that's handed to you by a Pacific Islander.
Yes.
You reach for a bar of soap, and that's given to you by the hands of a Frenchman. And then you go in the kitchen and drink your coffee for the morning, and that's poured in your cup by a South American. Or maybe you want tea, and that's poured in your cup by a Chinese. Or maybe you desire to have cocoa for breakfast, and that's poured in your cup by a West African. And you reach over for your toast, and that's given to you by the hands of an English-speaking farmer, not to mention the bacon. And before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you are dependent on more than half of the world. This is the way the universe is structured.
Yes. Yes.
King.
You know, can I just throw in here? I think that
Mapson.
what ought to concern us today is the way in which Dr. King's message has been sanitized.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc.
And I've said this in my post, and I think I may have said it Sunday morning, that conservatives have made Dr. King one of their own. And his words have been twisted to suit a political agenda, and the real King is not allowed to speak anymore. And I think the further we get away from his physical life, and you know, there are not many alive now who can claim to have physical contact with him as he lived. And the further away we get from that, you know, I was blessed to live in that time. And when he was assassinated, I was a student at Crozer, and along with Levi Baldwin and another student, we drove all night and stood in line to view his body at Ebenezer Baptist Church. But the further we get from that, the more tempting it is for people to sanitize him and his message. And he's no longer prophet, but priest.
That's it.
Well said. Well said.
And let me say this to you, Dr. Dickens. Dr. Dickens.
Oh, Dr. Brown, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Brown. This floor is yours.
You know, I have in my office now a beautiful sponge all painting of Dr. King that one of my colleagues' brother when I was pastoring my first church, St. Paul's in Westchester, Pennsylvania, gave to me after Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He was awarded the Peace Prize, as I stated earlier, 1964. And I went over to Crozer
Right.
to call on the dean and the president to suggest that I would donate to the Crozer this beautiful painting of Dr. King. And both the president and the dean told me, we're sorry, but we cannot accept the portrait. That's what they told me.
Right.
And I said, why? So, well, there may be other alumni of Crozer who would think that they should have been considered for their portraits to be hung up in Old Main. I said, but no other alumnus of Crozer has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And then Wells chimed in and said, well, and then Dr. King is too radical. That's how they viewed him in his lifetime. He's
Right.
too radical. And some of our donors would maybe close up
Right.
their purses, not give money to Crozer. And it would adversely impact our fundraising.
Right. Absolutely.
So I didn't argue with them. I thanked them for hearing me. Went on back to my office at St. Paul's and hung that portrait up in my office. But after Dr. King was assassinated, April the 4th, 1968, I got a call from them. Wanted to know if I still had that portrait of Dr. King and whether or not I would consider donating it to the school. And I said, yes, I have it. I'm looking at it right now. However, I'm sorry. I can't let go of it.
Yes, sir.
It means more to me now. That's a true story, brothers.
Yeah, that's a true story. I know it's true. And it is also true that Dr. Barbour at one time wanted to teach at Crozer. They wouldn't have him.
That's right.
And when they finally got around to wanting him to teach, he said no.
Mm-hmm.
So that lets you know liberalism goes but so far. Because even historically in northern liberal seminaries, there was a quota. They allowed 2 blacks, and they allowed 2 so that they could be roommates.
Yep.
So
and now let's take it further.
Howard Thurman couldn't even get into Andover Newton because he was black, and so he applied to Colgate, which was then called Rochester Seminary, and he got in because they hadn't reached the quota, and he could room with the other black student there.
Thank you, Brother Mapson, for mentioning that. And Dr. Dickens, let me say this.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays told me out of his own mouth that he was denied admission to Colgate Rochester Divinity School in 1920.
Right.
Even though he had finished Bates College, Phi Beta Kappa.
Right.
He received a letter telling him that they had reached their quota for black students at Colgate Rochester. But he didn't let that stop him. That did not break his spirit. He went to work on the railroad as a Pullman porter.
Right.
Until he applied to the University of Chicago, where he got his master's and his doctorate.
This is the comments are coming in, and a lot of the comments are saying very rich. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Adelekan. Thank you, Dr. Mapson. And I'm just a student and absorbing all of this rich history. Want to say, want to talk two things. These are large subjects, and I want to make sure that you all have the time to unpack it. Say something of what would be the meaning as we live in this time that we're living in now, in the 21st century. What would be the meaning of Dr. King's beloved community? What are your thoughts on Dr. King's beloved community? What are the obstacles that are in the way of achieving that dream? What are the challenges we face in actually achieving the beloved community in 2022? Now we have a lot of different things that we're dealing with right now. The voting rights. I can't believe that we even talking about voting rights in 2022. I was talking to my daughter who we were sharing and which we were talking about the anti-lynching bill, and she's a Spelman alumna, and I said we shouldn't even be talking about an anti-lynching bill. I said this is not a heavy lift. This is not talking about Build Back Better. This is not asking about money. This is just passing a bill, an anti-lynching bill, a voting rights bill. Should be lightweight stuff. We shouldn't even be talking about this. So what are the obstacles that are in the way of achieving that dream? What are the challenges we face in actually achieving the beloved community? And so the emphasis is not just about, because Dr. King, we all know Dr. King was just not about talking, just not about giving great speeches. And it troubles me when we have every year this time, it's I have a dream. I have a dream. Nothing said about the letter from a Birmingham jail or the Riverside speech on Vietnam, why he opposed the Vietnam War. And at the time of his death, the polls say that he had a 75%, at least a 75% disapproval rating among whites. Amongst blacks, it was probably even less than 50% approval rating because of the Dr. Adelekan talked about it earlier about the Black Power movement, saying, Dr. King, your time has passed on. Now, this is a new time with Stokely Carmichael and others saying that we're going to do this. And that method won't work up here in the North, in Chicago and New York. Stay down in Mississippi and Alabama for that. And so here we are today, and we're talking about some of the same things in 2022 that Dr. King was dealing with in 1968. What must be done, and how do we do it and do it well at this time?
Dr. Dickens,
Dr. King talked about the fierce urgency of now.
We must persist in being truth tellers. Truth tellers.
Right.
Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will do what? Set you free." We have got to respectfully tell the truth to a world, our world, where white supremacy still reigns. That's it.
Sure.
And call it for what it is. White entitlement, white privilege, racism. We still have that disease. And people are refusing to be fascinated, exercised of it all. And I've always contended that Mr. Obama became the first Black president of this nation because Well, first of all, he's got a lot going for himself. Head and shoulder above the pack. But if we had not been in 2 wars and the economy sick, we never would have seen this first Black president. And even after he was elected, whatever means or reason, what did old McConnell do? He was calling a meeting on the day of the inauguration.
Yes.
Make sure that he will have only 1 term. But after this Black brother got 2 terms, the threatened, insecure white males of America said, we're going to tear this temple down. We're not going to let these Black and brown people have any of it. So that's what we got to be aware of. And number 2, we must be aware that our humanity is not respected. I was sharing with someone the other day. It's all right. It's a good gesture for her. But this nation has put the image of Maya Angelou, who's from San Francisco, by way of Arkansas. They came to the point of getting through the process a coin, 25 cents for her.
Yes.
But before one Donald Trump got into that White House, the measure was on the drawing board for the image of Harriet Tubman to be on the $20 bill. The $20 bill.
Right, that's right.
And they put it on hold.
Talk, sir, talk.
And then you have this situation where number 45 idolized that evil man, Andrew Jackson, who was an exterminator of the Native American and was a racist.
Yes.
Par excellence. They are still idolizing and worshiping white superiority. That's what we got to remember. And the other thing I would remind you of is that the economic and political system are threatened by us. My brother Adelekan, I share with you that Dr. Mays delivered his last charge to the students who graduated in 1967 at Morehouse. And I have a copy of that, and I want to send. Do you know what Dr. Mays said in that address to those graduates? Our problem in the future will not come from the rapid segregationists like George Wallace of Alabama, Forbes of Arkansas, Ross Barnett in Mississippi, or Lester Maddox of Georgia. But our problem will come from the so-called progressive liberal whites who will wine and dine you in the swankers of hotels, sip tea with you.
Yes.
But we refuse to share economic and political power with you.
Right.
And that's why today, this voter suppression, voter intimidation is still alive, kicking and doing well. Gerrymandering, well, the Supreme Court over in Ohio today ruled against the redistricting there. But still, that's been their game plan. To wipe us out of the equation when it comes to politics and economic empowerment. And in the very city that I'm in now, been here 46 years, the median income for Black folks is, per capita, $35,000 a year. For white folks, it's $110,000. For Asians and Latinos, between 70 and 85,000. So need I say any more about this demon, this virus of injustice
And the issue of white evangelical
racial entitlement?
Pastor Dickens, may I just,
yes.
Dr. Mapson, did you want to say something very quickly?
No, please go ahead.
What I would say is that it's important. I just want to sort of, if I can, weave together some of the insights that we've heard. But I think when we look at King, especially in terms of his major work, I think there are a couple of things that we need to track. One is that King's critique was about white supremacy, but at the end, has already been accented, the three evils were militarism,
Yes,
racism,
Poverty.
right, and poverty. So the question then becomes, how do we reread that 50 years plus years later? I would think that a couple of things that I would track. One is King had a major critique of class, but not just between Blacks and whites. He had a major critique of class within the African-American community.
Right.
And he challenged middle-class Blacks that were beginning to forget their own brothers and sisters in the hood. So what you find now, 50, 60 years later, is you have a deeper, more robust Black middle class, but you have a widening gap between Black middle class and Black working class, and you have a group that never existed under King's time. You have a new Black underclass because you got people that go to work and still don't get to the poverty line. So you have to understand that King's critique, if we're going to be truly King, we must engage in an internal critique within African-American communities. I think that's one level. So you got to balance that.
The working poor.
but the
point I'm trying to make is that what integration did in part, if we're going to be honest, is that it turned the vanilla suburbs into, if you were in Neapolitan suburbs, where African-Americans began to leave and created a donut within the urban cities. That's why you have the systematic deconstruction of the tax base. And that's what we're crying for today. At the same time, you had invasion of drugs, and then you had a massive reproduction of the criminal industrial system. So therefore, we have to deal with some things, even among African Americans. Not only is there a widening gap between middle-class Americans, so to speak. Of course, you got the few at the top. You got the LeBrons, you got the Michael Jordans. You see what I'm saying? You got the Money Mayweathers, and you got Oprah. The point I'm trying to make is you still got Pookie. And the interesting thing is you got more Pookies today than you had in King's day, right? And they are not coming to church.
Yeah.
They're not coming to church. The thing is, they're not trying to come to hear as great a preacher as Dr. Mapson is, Dr. Brown. They would rather go and do Twitter and watch the game like they're doing right now. They're trying to watch who's going to win between the Cards and somebody else. So that's one thing that we have to confront. I think the other thing we have to confront is culture, but that's already been dealt with in terms of race. But I think this is the major thing King pressed upon us. And this is what you're finding with white evangelicals, that the American Civil War was only on the one hand in terms of canon. The real American Civil War is a church war. And what you find is you have two different folk reading one Bible, and it's a perennial fight in the Christian church about which interpretation is going to rule. That's slavery, that's the pogroms in Europe, that's Hitler. But what you're finding today is which Christianity is going to come out on top. And I think that's where the conversation has to go. And that's why it is very hard in Black and white churches for us to evangelize. And the younger generation will tell you they love Jesus, but they can't stand the church. And that echo is being found not just with African Americans, aka Henry Louis Gates, which we have some problems with, but you find it more and more with white evangelicalism. Why is that important? Because it means that the few whites that you have are not running to the gospel, they're running to guns, and they're loading up, because even folk, even within their own ranks, are not coming back to church, and they feel, right, the colorization of America, and they're saying something is going to happen to us. That's why they're loading up. And so the point I'm trying to make is to read King is not just to replay King, we have to reinterpret King in light of the current crisis and decay of today's civilization. And that's why folk in Nigeria are on the line, folk in Europe, and where this is writ large is an access to the vaccine and to healthcare and whether or not we wear masks. That's the debate I think that we have.
I think Dr. Mapson is leaning in. I think he wants to jump in.
I'm going to submit to my elders.
No. I don't want to. I mean, amen.
I know it's getting late. We're on different time zones, but I got to submit to my elders. So
that's right. I'm watching. Dr. Brown. Can I say this?
My brother. We got to go back before this present age. You read Frederick Douglass's speech, 1852.
Talk, sir.
The 5th of July. You raise the question, what does the 4th of July mean
to me?
The slave.
My God.
And he gives a scathing critique of white evangelical Protestantism. Y'all read that again. And also when it comes to this classism within us, 1948 at Wilberforce, W.B. Du Bois lit into the so-called black bourgeoisie. And he said that you disappointed me. And when he gave that speech at that boule,
yes,
what happened? Nobody would speak to him, and he was left outside on a bench by himself. 1948. But you know, even the idea of the talented tent did not originate with Du Bois. It was Dr. Henry Morehouse.
Right.
He's the one who coined the phrase, the talented tent. And Du Bois popularized it.
Good word, Doc.
Right.
He said we could just get 10% of those who were trained and disciplined, and they would become missionaries of self-help and culture and all that good stuff. We will be able to advance the cause for our race to receive.
If you go back to your question, Reverend Dickens, we have to really ask, what's changed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Du Bois, King now. Now, of course, we would agree that, you know, the legal structure of segregation has toppled, but the vestiges are still there. And so when we talk about, he talked about militarism, what was it, poverty, classism, I think the three you mentioned.
Militarism, materialism, and racism.
Yeah, so that's still the key. If they're not dismantled, if those structures are not dismantled, there can be no beloved community until that happens. And I see a parallel between the white evangelicals today and his response to the white Christian, religious leaders who criticized the civil rights movement and demonstrations. In the letter from the Birmingham jail, they claimed that they were for equality.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're talking, Doc. You're talking good stuff.
Yeah, but not now and not this way. It's gonna come by and by.
I remember hearing Thomas N. Todd, former civil rights attorney, say, "Have things really changed, or are there just new signs?" He said in his daddy's day, you know, there were white and colored signs in Alabama. And he says, in this time, have things really changed, or are there new signs? And if there are new signs, can we read the signs?
Yeah, there's still water fountains we can't drink from.
Yes.
I see some folk who trying to jump in, Dr. Brash.
I think we're at the limit at the time. So
Okay.
I just want to get final thoughts and then open it up. I think Dr. Waller for any possible questions and answers at this time, and we're going to about 10 minutes of that, if we can push it to that. But I want to get final thoughts, starting with Dr. Brown. We may have to do part 2. This was just so rich, and this is just a wealth of information on the legacy and of Dr. King. But Dr. Last thoughts, Dr. Brown, and then Dr. Mapson and Dr. Adelekan, in that order.
Well, again, I want to thank everyone for this incredible conversation. And we need more of this.
Right.
Don't know how much time we have left on this earth, but the time that I have left, I'm going to try to pass on to everybody what was passed on to me by my elders, whom I just took delight in carrying their briefcases or suitcases. And Dr. Mays reminded me that he received a lot of honors, awards, degrees, and opportunities, as he would say, that I didn't deserve. But I can never, Mr. Brown, pay those people back who blessed me. But at least I ought to be decent enough,
Yes,
to just pass on to you young Morehouse men, to pass on to someone else who's trying to find their way through this crazy world. And I feel that we, as Dr. Barbour would say, we must develop our survival kit. And if white racism doesn't die out, that the bigots are always going to be around. And if ignorance will try to reign in this nation, we got to have an oasis somewhere. That's why in times of challenge, we ought to turn to each other and never own each other. So we have been marginalized, dehumanized, and we need community, not rugged individualism. The filter rich folks, as the ancient Caesars, rulers, czars were able to, they could be individualists. But the poor and the marginalized and the oppressed always have been able to carve out some means of survival through turning to each other. And that's what Dr. King was trying to do with that beloved community.
yes, sir.
And I think this is the key. In the meantime, that's our only way to survival. As I stated earlier, I believe that this democratic republic is on its way down and out. unless there is a remnant of all races and backgrounds who will say, hey, enough is enough. We must stop this insanity and heal this nation of its sickness.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Mapson?
I'm, which I did not say in the beginning, just privileged to be a part of this and grateful to Crozer Library and to you, Reverend Dickens. This has been rich for me. I just want to leave one memory of mine, which 1964, I was a student at Morehouse, and I went to Ebenezer Baptist Church because I heard that Dr. King was preaching that Sunday. And I went down and I sat and listened to him, and the subject of his sermon was the ultimate doom of evil. And I live my life knowing that we are beset with so many problems, but I trust God.
Yes.
And by the way, I have that bulletin in my study framed.
Oh my.
From 1964 when I heard him preach. But I'm privileged to be a part of two of my great friends and colleagues in ministry, and you as well. And the Crozer Seminary will always be for me sacred ground.
Yes.
Sacred ground.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Dr. Adelekan.
Yes, just
Thank you.
appreciation for God, for Mom who's on here, for the great institutions of the Tabernacle Baptist Church of Dayton, Palmer Theological Seminary. I want to give God praise for Susan Waller and Crozer Library, Dr. Dickens, Pastor Brown, Pastor Mapson. And I got friends here who are on this call from Nigeria. They are 6 hours ahead. I got folk from London and Canada. So I know that the hour is far spent, but it humbles me that you will remain on the line. So many people who have sown into my life, my aunt from Texas, Tolliver's, I'm just grateful. Dr. Johnson, our dean, thank you. Colleagues, mentors like Dr. Brash and Dr. Woodard. Just so many people have fed in that way. I'm a footnote to King because so many sources fed him. There's a stream that makes glad the city of God. So I'm just humbled to be here, and to God be the glory.
Awesome. Amen. Well, thank you all. Just as a matter of note, I am Reverend Keith Dickens. I haven't earned that distinction of doctor yet, but I received the encouragement.
We all doctors.
But I thank you all for just having this opportunity, and I'm blessed, beyond blessed, to be able to pick up the phone, just to pick up the phone and have access. And I don't count that lightly, to be able to call Dr. Brown and Dr. Mapson and Dr. Adelekan. And you've always been very encouraging and uplifting to me. And I thank God for that. And to be able to share it on this kind of a platform tonight on Dr. King.